You ever get that feeling that you're playing a game, but you don't actually know the rules? Like the choices you make, the news you see, even the history you're taught. It's all part of some bigger system, right? A kind of scaffolding that's built around you to, well, guide your behavior. We're going to dive right into that. We're going to deconstruct the very systems that engineer our reality. So let's get personal for a second. Just think about your day-to-day life, your beliefs, all of it. How much of that is really yours? How much of it comes from you, and how much has been kind of shaped for you without you even noticing? That's the big question we're tackling today. Okay, so here's our game plan. First, we'll break down this whole idea of a scaffolding of control. Then, we'll see how it engineers a simpler reality. After that, we'll get into technology's role in all this, look at a real-world fight over history at the Smithsonian, and wrap up with two totally different ways people can push back. All right, first up, the scaffolding of control. So let's try thinking about society in a different way, not as a bunch of individuals, but as this huge, complex, self-regulating machine. Some theorists even call it a cybernetic system. And its main goal? It's not evil, not really. It's just stability. And to stay stable, it has to manage the one thing that's always unpredictable: people, us. So how does a system manage millions of unpredictable people? Well, its main job is to create what one source calls a shared delusion of reality. It's a world where you feel free, you feel like you're making your own choices, but really, you're just picking from a very small, very controlled menu. So let's look at the two main tools it uses to build this simplified reality. Okay, the first tool has a fancy name: variety attenuation. But the idea is actually pretty simple. Think about it. The real world is incredibly complex. And you, as a person, you're incredibly complex too. A massive system like a government or a corporation, it just can't deal with all that nuance, all that variety. It would break. So to work it all, it has to simplify everything. It has to attenuate or dial down all that complexity. And you see this everywhere. When the system looks at you, it doesn't see you. It doesn't see your hopes, your dreams, your unique personality. No, it sees a zip code, a tax bracket, an age group. It might even see a racial category. These aren't just labels, right? They're little boxes. They're low-variety categories designed to ignore everything that makes you an individual, all so it can manage millions of people at once. It's all about simplification. Okay, so that's how the system simplifies the outside world. But what about our minds, our internal world? Well, that's where the second tool comes in: weaponized chaos. Just think about the 24/7 news cycle, the economic shocks, the endless social media outrage. This constant state of anxiety, it's not an accident. It's a tool. It's designed to keep you in a state of permanent crisis, always reacting to the next thing, the next fire, so you never ever have a moment to stop and actually think. And this weaponized chaos, it's meant to push our brains into a very specific mode. See, when things are stable, we're naturally K strategists. We think long-term, we plan, we build complex models of the world in our heads. But when the system floods us with chaos, it forces us into an R strategy mindset. We become purely reactive, thinking gets fragmented, and all we can focus on is short-term survival. And let's be real, you can't plan a revolution when you're just worried about making it to Friday. Okay, so we've got the how, right? Variety, attenuation, and weaponized chaos. But that leaves a huge question. Why? Why does the system do this? To answer that, we're going to look at a pretty radical source, a critique of the entire industrial technological system. And its argument is that this control, it isn't some bug in the system, it's a feature. And this text doesn't pull any punches. Here's the core idea, and it is a big one. Industrial technological society cannot be reformed in such a way as to prevent it from progressively narrowing the sphere of human freedom. Whoa, so what does that mean? It means that for our complex, high-tech world to even work, it has to control people. It has to regulate our behavior. Because in a system this interconnected, real, unpredictable freedom isn't a feature, it's a threat. So freedom, by necessity, has to shrink over time. And the really crucial part here is that this doesn't happen overnight with some big declaration. No, the text argues it's a slow creep. It's death by 1,000 cuts. A new technology comes out, and hey, it's optional. It's just a cool new convenience. But then, society starts to change, to rebuild itself around that technology. And pretty soon, you basically can't function without it. Every single step feels small and harmless, so you never see the big picture. There's never one clear moment to stand up and say, no. So what's the end goal of all this? According to this analysis, it's not some evil conspiracy run by people in a dark room. It's simpler, and maybe even scarier than that. It's just the system trying to survive. The ultimate goal is to make people, and I'm quoting here, sufficiently docile so that their behavior no longer threatens the system. In other words, to solve the problem of unpredictable humans. Okay, so we've got this whole theory of control, right? Simplify people, create chaos. It sounds pretty abstract, but how does a system actually engineer reality? Well, a big part of it is controlling the stories we tell ourselves about who we are. And that brings us to a very real, very recent case study, a major fight over history at the Smithsonian. And just to show you how high the stakes were, listen to how some in the media were reacting at the time. One commentator said, "This is really bad and really, really dangerous." So the perception from this side was clear. This wasn't just another political fight. This was seen as a direct threat to how we understand our own history. So here's how it reportedly went down according to the sources. First, in March of 2025, an executive order comes out criticizing the National Museum of African American History and Culture. Then, later that year, reports surface that over 30 artifacts are removed. We're talking items from historical giants like Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass. Then, the White House directs a review of 8 different Smithsonian museums to align them with a specific interpretation of American history. And finally, text about President Trump's impeachment is changed, removing references to false election claims. You can see the pattern here, a clear attempt to reshape the official story. And this is where it all comes together. Commentators pointed out this huge gap between the stated goals and the reported actions. The official goal was to create unifying descriptions, but critics said the action was sanitizing divisive history, like slavery. The goal was an historically accurate narrative, but what they saw was the rewriting of impeachment text. The goal was to counter race-centered ideology, but the action was removing key African American artifacts. This is exactly what we were talking about. Critics called this variety attenuation, taking a messy, complex history and flattening it into a simple, unifying story. And by turning history into this huge fight, it also acts as weaponized chaos, keeping everyone angry and distracted. So, if this is the world we live in, a world with this scaffolding of control, where even our own history is up for grabs, what do we do? How do we even begin to respond? Well, our sources lay out 2 very, very different paths forward. All right, path number 1 is the cognitive path. This is the analytical approach. It's about fighting the system from the inside by using the one thing the system can't simplify, the complexity of your own mind. You deconstruct its tactics, you separate reality from the emotions it's trying to stir up, you basically outthink it. Then you have path number 2, the spiritual path. And this one is completely different. It's not about analyzing the system, it's about abandoning it. It's about awakening what Terence McKenna called archaic values, rejecting materialism and going completely outside the whole game. And this quote from McKenna really nails the heart of that spiritual path. He said, "The only counterpoise to consumer values, to materialism, is spiritualism." The idea here is simple. You can't beat a system built on materialism by playing its game. The only real way to resist is to build an inner life, a spiritual richness that's so powerful that all the stuff the system tries to sell you, it just becomes meaningless. So that leaves us with one last big question to chew on. If the whole point of the system is to simplify your world, to flatten your reality, what's the most powerful act of resistance? Is it an act of analysis, to use your mind to see the scaffolding for what it is? Or is it an act of spiritual rebellion, to just turn your back on the whole thing and walk away? I'll leave you with that.